Good evening, everybody. We are here again for the GOSA 2025 presentation series. We are here with Craig Munson tonight for the Sawmill Dormancy, a GIS perspective. And with that, we'll go straight here to Craig.
Hi, everybody. Well, as previously mentioned, my name is Craig Munson Jr., and I'll be going over the Sawmill Dormancy and going over a GIS perspective of that, and I'll get into what that all means shortly here. So first things first, well, who am I? So I have been gazing since 2012 after my first trip to Yellowstone with my family. Here you can see me on the left, very enthusiastically grinning into the camera as beehive geyser erupts out of the back of my head. Since then I am a geoscience student at Southern New Hampshire University, finishing that up after some time here. I've also had the honor to give you the spot summary since 2022. So on for each couple months here, I put together something for everybody to enjoy. So I've really enjoyed that. So here's an overview of what we're all going to be talking about this evening. First of all, we're going to go into, well, why Sawmill? I mean, to some people it's like, oh, duh, Sawmill, but to some people, well, it's just Sawmill. Who cares? We're also going to get into, well, what is GIS, or what is this GIS thing that I keep seeing on all over this page? We're going to go over some data as well. I'm going to go over how it was obtained and how it was manipulated and how I did the calculations and everything that entails that. Finally, we're going to get to some actual mapping, good old-fashioned mapping. I know us as gazers are very much enjoy our maps. Or at least I could stare at them all day, especially old maps, new maps, anywhere in between maps. And then after that, we're going to get into some interpretation of what these maps could mean, or what these maps could show us, could help us gain some more understanding of these complex features. And also we could talk about some future projects too, if we have the time. Here's a picture of just, well, everybody's favorite. And so some background here, I'm sure a lot of us know, but for those that don't know, the Sawmill Group underwent a dormancy lasting from 2017 to 2021. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it seems smaller than I actually thought it would be. But the main geysers that really didn't do anything during this period of time is Sawmill itself, Uncertain, Tardy kind of. So Tardy geyser, had a couple of one-off eruptions, especially as the dormancy began to progress, as we started moving into this 2019, 2020, 2021, and until finally Sawmill came back. And of course, Penta had been missing, and actually the picture here is one of the first times it's very difficult to see actually, but one of the first times that the pools connected in Penta that I had seen and since the dormancy. This was in 2021, which was a very nice time to be in the park. So, again, why Sawmill? So the Sawmill Group is one of the most dynamic groups in Yellowstone, especially that is easily accessible, and you can kind of see everything from one point of view. It also follows some, well, I don't want to be too nice to the Sawmill Group here, but it tends to follow some rules that have been historically pretty concrete. However, that's all kind of been thrown out the window since 2017. Even today, after Sawmill's come back, we still are showing some signs of instability. But so this picture here is actually what really got me into this rabbit hole. So I was there during the reactivations. I would call it the startup sequence, is what I like to call it, but it was the first couple days as Sawmill was beginning to awaken, and I noticed that, oh my gosh, there's blue in the pool. That's insane, and that's something that I hadn't seen in a long time. And lo and behold, a few days later, it had erupted. One other important reason why I'm picking the Sawmill Group is we have to start small. We have to start somewhere, because this if you can look through the spaghetti on the screen here, that is Geyser Hill. And that is uh, theoretical connections and correlations. And as you can see, that this doesn't really tell us much. All it tells us is that there's a bunch of geysers here that may or may not be connected in one way or another. And this is a case of too much data telling us nothing. So I would love to take this apart one day, one piece at a time, but I had to get familiar with the technology and familiar with, how to communicate what I'm seeing, because I mean, it looks like a game of pickup sticks. So what is GIS? What is GIS that I keep seeing on the screen? So GIS stands for Geographic Information System. And so this integrates, this is a type of data collection or data visualization that puts data and maps together into one cohesive and frankly easy to read, easy to visualize media. So spatial data, which is like your maps, you could even have, roads, anything with attributes. And, it means that we can take things like this, which I'm sure a lot of you recognize as one of the first maps of the Firehole River, and again, Geyser Hill. Take that, and this is a GIS program at the bottom that stands for QGIS, and we can put these things together and see what happens. So this all sounds very esoteric to begin with, like, oh, this is some cryptic and niche thing that I don't really worry about every day. Well, actually, you use GIS every day, as I say, in space. So you use GPS. I'm sure most of us use GPS maps. You have Apple Maps, Google Maps. Anything that uses a GPS is kind of its own GIS system there. So every point, every house has an attribute, and that attribute is its GPS location, or even down to like, if we're not talking about GPS locations, we're talking about roads, and those roads have certain traffic on them, and we can tell like, oh, I want to use this route because Google Maps says it's red traffic here, and I'm not going to make it to work on time. Another way you could use it is Amazon packages. I don't know if I might be in the minority here, but if I'm really excited and I got a package coming, I'm always tracking it, making sure like, oh, hey, it's 6 stops away. That is a use case for GIS. And I'm sure all of us as gazers, I mean, a significant portion of us have looked at Google Earth and, what's out there, taking a look at the elevation. Oh, we can pinpoint in there, use areas we couldn't normally reach. And then one final and one of the most important uses of GIS is emergency services. I know nowadays you can actually, in the middle of nowhere, using like a satellite phone, or I know iPhones have the new satellite text thing. You can send a text to EMS, and they will figure out where you are based on the data that you send them, and they can get somebody out to help you. And a more tangible way, or a more visual way, is that during the LA fires recently, there was a website that you could go to that a volunteer had put together that you could see. It was a map, and it would have where the fires are and where the evacuation radiuses are, and that was very helpful to people. So this is not some esoteric data. This is something that everybody uses every day, since we've been able to use GPS for the most part. Also, there are some very bizarre applications. So GIS data comes in many forms and flavors. So one of these is elevation data, and one of the most accurate ways to get elevation data is through LiDAR, or it's light radar, so to speak. So it uses photons instead of sound to actually get information on elevation and stuff like that. So I don't know if you can recognize this, but this is a 3D model of Geyser Hill. So you can actually, I'm sure we can pick out the Firehole River in the front there, and we can see maybe even a few features that we recognize. Like you can pick out Lion on here quite easily. So this is a 3D model that I made. It was, well, I didn't really make it. I just had the data that was available for free. So this was available on a website. Somebody had gotten a grant to take um, a lidar scanner, strap it on an airplane, and fly over most of the major geyser basins in Yellowstone. So I know it goes over at least Midway and Upper Geyser Basin and Norris for certain. But one thing I've actually done with this model is I'm kind of a nerd if you couldn't tell with this stuff. I have a 3D printer, so I was able to 3D print my own geyser model or my own my own Geyser Hill model. So I have it sitting on my desk. So let's get back into like what we're here for. Like let's get into Sawmill and the numbers. So for data acquisition, to actually get the points on the map, they're available in quite a few places. I know the RCN network through Montana State University has a pretty not exhaustive, but a massive list of geothermal features in Yellowstone that it can be helpful. Geyser Times also has this available, and they have it on their KML file for their Google Earth file, which is really nice. And that's actually the one I use because it's the one that's been most updated most recently. A lot of the RCN network data is from 1996, and GPS and what has been available to the public, and the strength of GPS has increased dramatically since then. So again, accuracy is key. We all want to be on the same page on which feature is which. We don't want to go, okay, well, this had this one name at this one point and this one name at this other point. Hopefully we're past that, doing the, deleted tea kettle or old tardy and regular tardy geyser. Hopefully we're past that. So these are a couple of tools I use, or the main tools I used for putting this all together. I use QGIS, which I don't know if you're familiar, but some of you might have heard of ArcGIS or ArcPro GIS. That is kind of the industry standard, but that also costs $700 a month in licensing agreements to do. So I prefer QGIS, which is free. It does most of the same stuff. It's very versatile, and it has a large plugin library, which allows third-party software to get involved. Like, for example, that 3D model I made, I was able to do that because somebody had written a plugin for QGIS, and I could just plug in the LiDAR data, and there it is. Finally, for the main data analysis part, I used Python and the Pandas library of Python. And the best way I can explain Python and Pandas is, well, Python is a programming language and one of the fastest growing programming languages and most used to date. And Pandas is, long story short, it's Excel on steroids. You can put way more data in, and you can manipulate data and clean data up in much faster than you would in Excel. So what did I do to get my data? So I have a diagram here and that I'll explain on the side a little bit, but I had imported all of the eruptions from certain periods of time from Geyser Times to my program. And so what I had done is I lost my train of thought here. I imported all the data of all the Sawmill group, and I had taken each eruption, and take it as a separate event, an individual point in time for each Sawmill eruption, each churn eruption, each uncertain eruption, what have you. I had every single one on basically a number line. And each event would leave a ripple in the data. I'm just trying to get a way to explain this because I have spent, I think, at least 2 years trying to figure out the best way to explain this. But each geyser and each eruption leaves its own ripple in the data. And each ripple will eventually bump into another eruption on that number line in time. So I am measuring. So if Sawmill erupts, I want to know when was the last uncertain, when was the last churn, when was the last penta, and so on. I want to know how everything was what in that point in time. So I can then measure all of those ripples for every single feature, for every single geyser, which takes a lot of time, even with a software program or even with a program. And with that, I can run a correlation based on how big or how long or how short amount of time that is. So I had run a Spearman correlation, which is a little bit more sensitive to outliers, which I thought was important here when dealing with timescales of, okay, we haven't seen Sawmill in 4 years, 4 or 5 years. What are we gonna do when that happens? And it also doesn't assume a linear relationship, which I don't think is the case with a lot of these complex systems. I personally don't see a linear relationship happening between all of these features. But I could be wrong, and I could run the data with the Pearson correlation method, which does assume a linear relationship. So, what did I just do? What I did is I took all of that and I made a correlation map first. And actually, I'm actually going to introduce you to some other data first, just so we can get this down. It's also what I had on hand currently. So I did this for the fountain area first because that was a little bit more simple, and I could take a look at things better, or I understood a little bit better at the time. So we're looking at a correlation map here, and basically what that means is as the number approaches +1, things are positively correlated. So to put that into more human terms here, that means let me zoom in on this here because it's a little small. So let's use one that makes sense historically. So this was with all of the data from the fountain group. So we have jet here, or time since jet. So as the time since jet decreases, so does the time since fountain that got cut off at the bottom here. So that means the shorter the interval of jet, the shorter the interval of fountain, which we can extrapolate to mean fountain really likes jet. To put it in simpler terms here. For example, let's look at a negative correlation. We have a few weak negative correlations here that on this don't really work too well, but let's look at time since mass geyser. So then we have time since bear claw geyser. So these are correlations, mind you, and I'll get into what correlations mean and what they definitely don't mean. But in the numbers, so to speak, as the time since mask decreased, the time since bear claw increased. So negative correlations are opposites, if that makes sense there. And these ones are just just everything correlating to itself. I thought that would be helpful just to get a quick view into what we're actually looking at, because our next step is finally plotting our geysers. So if we ignore the spaghetti on the right here, which is Geyser Hill staring at us in the face, we can actually zoom in and take a look at our old Sawmill group. And I know I have a few things in here that aren't Sawmill group proper, but I was just taking a look at, okay, is there anything weird here? Especially with the proximity of these groups here and rumors over time and just seeing if anything's correct. So we have our usual suspects all laid out, all mapped. And this was actually all done with the Geyser Times KML file, which is a Google Earth file, which is available to anybody at any time. So if you want to reproduce this, you totally can. You can go ahead and just import this into a Google Earth, which is a GIS software, or QGIS, or anything you'd like. So we finally arrived at being able to look at some of these maps. So here we have Sawmill pre-dormancy, and yes, I do have Gizmo and Tilt's baby here. We don't have to focus on those too much. I don't want to put too much thought into that at the moment because I'm not trying to make any wild claims tonight. I know we're deep in the off season now, so I know wild claims tend to start during the off season while we're all anxious to get back into the geyser basin and wanting to get our hands dirty with some more gazing. But so one thing we notice when we look at the Sawmill group pre-dormancy is we see a very complex and interconnected web of subtle and not so subtle relationships. So I actually have one more slide here of the same thing that's going to be a little bit bigger so we can take a look at it together. So what we see here is, I'm just going to zoom in here. Actually, I'm just going to pull up the laser pointer. So let's focus on this area in general here. Let's leave these out for now, and we can talk about those at a later time. But we see a lot of connections here, and just for reference here, a red line means it's negatively correlated, a green line means it's positively correlated, and in between, like we have oranges and yellows, those are weaker correlations. So those are your +3s, +4s, something that's at least mildly interesting, something to keep an eye on, but nothing that goes, oh my gosh, this is a very strong correlation, we got to keep an eye on this, or anything like that. No, this is stuff like that. And what we see, so we have this web here, and one thing that I take note of that I see immediately is this arc of red. And what I see here is a bunch of negative correlations between all of these features here. I also see all of these, I see this main section here and this main section here currently, all talking to each other as a network. Now, this is going to get very abstract and very, but I think that this is a very important way to look at things now and again. So we're going to get into the dormancy here. And so again, 2017 to 2021, Sawmill geyser ceased activity. And I did actually, in this dormancy map here, I did actually catch some of the data from the startup sequence that I talked about, because I want to see if I saw anything interesting, like anything that goes, oh, that's really cool. And one of the things here that I see the most is the kind of a splitting of the group, or a complete lack of organization. I mean, I know the pre-dormancy, we have decades of data, but this is a distinct point in time in which only certain things could have happened. So I am also going to zoom in on this one a little bit more as well. And if we take a look here, and we can take a look at this arc again here, excuse me. That arc of negative correlation broke down entirely. So that just ceased to exist. And those were pretty strong correlations too. And from what I see here, Rift actually becomes more correlated with some of the features in the north. And what I've kind of seen for the most part is that it looks like almost a disconnecting of the northern part, excluding this, because this can make some of the maps look a little more connected than they actually are. But it looks like this northern section and this southern section are the main areas that have been split in half. And I'm not going to go into mechanics or why or how. I'm just here to show you what the numbers I have gathered say, or not even say, but what you can see. And we can actually pick up a couple things as well here. So during the startup sequence, we had, okay, well, UNNG CGG6, or Castle Geyser Group 6, became active for the first time in multiple decades during that startup sequence. And it's not, I'm not going to stand here and prove that, oh, this happened because of CGG6 caused anything. I'm just saying that it's interesting to look at here and interesting to know, because we see some positive correlations here for the little bit of data that is there, because not much data was available at the time, but for a little amount of data, we certainly have some connections here. So finally, we run across post-dormancy. So we're finally back in the swing of things. Sawmills come back. Everybody's happy, except for anybody who enjoys any other geyser but Sawmill. So Sawmill's kind of, I mean, I'm not even going over this at the moment. Sawmill has just kind of taken over as the main feature in the basin, or in the group. Penta really hasn't had a full eruption since that first day. And then Churn has not really been seen since. Um, Sawmill has basically been locked in this mode, so it's like, well, I took all this time off. I got to work overtime to make up for all that lost time. So features of interest that we see on this map here are going to be Rift Geyser and Spatter Geyser. So Spatter Geyser had recently been noticed more. I don't know, like it came back. I don't know how long it has been gone. I'm not an expert on Spatter Geysers, so don't come to me with your spatter questions. But Rift has become much more involved as far as the numbers are concerned in controlling mathematically controlling what goes on in the basin here. I know that I've been talking with a couple people on how I've been going back and forth personally on, well, do you need Rift for Baldur's Hole or do you need Rift for Baldur's Hole? I will concede officially here that at one point you did need, Rift was very good for Baldur's Hole, and it was essentially a requirement for a period of time. And after that, after everything, well, not everything, after Sawmill came back here. But let's take a closer look at this map together. Because we kind of see this arc beginning to form again, and we're starting to see a little bit more, for lack of better terms, talking between the north and south part of the basin here, or the group here, because we have Baldur correlations over here. So it's the network's coming back, so to speak, but it's still, we're not really out of the woods yet, so to speak, in that we're still in this disorganized mode, or I don't want to call it disorganized, but this not as connected mode. I see that we're also adding in a rift, though, which is very interesting to me. I mean, we could talk until we're blue in the face about whether or not Castle and the Sawmill group are connected. It's very hard to say, especially because as I'll get into my next slide, correlations can sometimes just mean nothing. So this is just a tool that we have. So context is key in everything that we do with anything regarding correlations. So nothing's going to beat experience here. So I'm not going to be here telling you, oh, what you're seeing or what you're saying is wrong because I saw numbers. No, that's not how this works. I have a feeling if I did, I'd get a lot of hate mail. And important thing to remember, again, I don't know if anybody's heard this before, but it's been drilled into my head quite often, is correlation does not equal causation. And I have a funny graph here that correlates the popularity of the first name Annabelle with UFO sightings in Maryland. And as you can see, that is a pretty suspicious curve here. And it's to the point now with, you have your ChatGPT and Copilots that somebody could take this and make an entire academic paper by importing it into ChatGPT, and it would look legit and everything would look right, but it wouldn't be true because there's no way that this could be something that actually exists. Because, I mean, there's a lot of things. There's, data mirages, there's data collection flaws. So, there's always flaws in data somewhere. I mean, where do you call the beginning of the geyser? Where do you call the end of the eruption? Right? I mean, why do we use interval instead of why is interval start to start and not end to start? I mean, that's another debate for the ages. There's also data analysis flaws. Like, I'm by no means saying that the way I cleaned and manipulated the data is a proper way to do it. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, and actually I'd be glad to see a better way to do it. This is just what I put together based on, like, what I thought would be a good model. But for example, I mean, there's some scenarios in which this that method of the ripple method I was using falls apart. For example, I mean, rift in Baldur's Hole. How are you going to connect correlations with a geyser that erupts for multiple hours at a time? It doesn't. It just, frankly, it just doesn't account for that in my model, and that's something that I can continue to hone in and change over time. But it's still never going to be perfect. There's still always going to be error. So, with that glowing review, how does this help us? What can we do with this information? So, basically, this gives us a bird's eye view of the geyser groups. I couldn't think of a better word for it, but health, or what's going on in certain groups, and a good way to look at it. It also gives us a starting point on what to look for, a starting point on research. Like, don't get me wrong, correlations can be one of the worst things ever, but they're also a really good thing to say, okay, why did it give me that number? Why is that showing up as a correlation? Start feeding into those probing questions that get us thinking as geyser gazers, and geyser gazers I like to call citizen scientists sometimes. Um, and then if you know enough context, so if you have that in basin butts in seats context, like you've sat in front of something for days and you know something, the math itself can sometimes really help you out because it is all statistics um, at the end of the day. And I don't want to sound like I I'm some like genius that I did this or something like this. I probably just got very lucky, but that fountain correlation map that I made, I was able to use that to catch jelly, or at least I thought I was using it to catch jelly. uh, I was able to. Here's a picture of it on the right here. I was able to catch 3 jellies in a row based on the correlation map that I was seeing. I was seeing good signs, like good positive correlations and good negative correlations, and I decided, you know what? I'm gonna sit here for a little bit. But I wouldn't know that without having both the context and the knowledge of just being there and the math, so to speak. Now, my next slide here is just going to be some references. I mean, I can, of course, make this available to everybody, but most of it is Geyser Times, the QGIS, Google Earth also. I use that as well. And Geyser Times for the map and the eruption data and statistics. And, you know, always cite yourself whenever you're doing something. I mean, at the end of the day, you get to put your name on it. But also, it helps if anybody else wants to look at your stuff and look backwards. They already have a citation put together for you. So, I've probably said quite a few things about quite a few numbers, quite a few maps, quite a few acronyms. Uh, and at this point, I'm going to actually open up to some questions just in case somebody's uncertain about something. And yes, I am very proud of that pun. What is next for you in GIS project? All right, so Corbin asks, what is next for me in GIS projects? What groups would you be most interested into looking into? Ooh, so for GIS projects, I have been working on a couple of things. One of my pet projects that I've been working on is, okay, if I could have a map, or actually, if I could make like a LED like map and make it out of wood and put multicolor LEDs in where each of the geysers go, and I could pull the eruption data and I could have them change colors to like, oh, this is erupting now in this spot, and I could see it change blue and go, oh, there it goes. I mean, I've done a couple of other interesting things. Like I've made a beehives indicator text alert, but that's actually not involved with GIS here. What groups would I be most interested in looking into? I'd be most interested into. Um, See, I need to wait for kind of more of a active period for this, but I would be interested in looking into the Grotto group and the Giant group and seeing how that all connects. Not that that data doesn't exist, but more data is always better, so to speak. Okay, out of all TGB1320 asks, out of the changes you saw pre and post dormancy in the data, what was the most illuminating in terms of your understanding of how the group functions? I think one of the most interesting things that I saw was definitely Rift suddenly appearing in the data. I mean, we had all of those decades of data where Rift really wasn't correlated with anything, but suddenly the dormancy happens. Suddenly post dormancy, it's still connected to, or correlated to all of the other features there, and seems to have an effect on quite a few of the Sawmill areas, which in my mind is really cool because that kind of connects the Grand Group and the Sawmill Group in a way that I don't think we've fully explored. How do you think you could account for different types of durations for sawmill? Shorts, mediums, deep drains, in the correlations. Okay, so yeah, so that is one of the limitations of the model still. One of the ways that I could account for it is adding durations into the correlation uh, math. So the problem with that is that duration data is very, compared to all of the actual eruptions, duration data is pretty sparse. And that's to nobody's fault. I mean, who wants to sit around? Oh, I mean, sawmill can last for hours. I mean, some people might want to sit around for hours at sawmill. I mean, I'm sure I would love to. I mean, I'm sure all of us would love to sit at sawmill for 3 hours right now in the middle of the off season. But it's just a limitation of the model, and I hope to refine it more as time goes on. Okay, Christy Gower asks, have you looked at the Belgian rising and falling with group activity? I have not, but I have. I'm so glad you asked this because I have had that in the back of my head ever since I've seen Belgian drop to nothing and rise to something. Um, what I would really need for that is I would need to actually write that down and get the data myself. I mean, I know that I have put notes on there of like, oh, it's this at this height and it's at this height and time, but uh, just more data is needed, and a way to track that that myself would be a good stepping stone. But I think that's a very interesting thing to keep an eye on here because I know I've seen drastic changes in Belgium in the last couple years here. That's a very good question. Thank you. Okay, Micah asks, are there other examples of in-basin contextual observations conflicting with or supporting correlations? Let me take a look here. Okay, so one of the most interesting ones that I've run across is looking back at Fountain, is Morning's Thief and Fountain. If you look at that correlation map, which I can make available after this, uh, it's almost no correlation, which anybody who's ever seen Fountain and Morning's Thief would go, well, that doesn't make any sense. And well, the fact is it really doesn't. So that's kind of an artifact of, of the process here. I mean, we all know, I mean, recently that Morning's Thief can erupt without Fountain, but it's not nearly as like obvious as a correlation as one would think. The other one that is really in my mind is the two features that were the closest together. Like they had a correlation of 0.91, which is honestly insane. Would be Dogbone and Thumping Hole. Those two features, I don't want to make any claims here, but I'm fairly certain they're pretty much the same feature at this point. Not that that's something I'm gonna make that claim, but if looking at a 0.91 correlation, it's pretty much, well, they're probably different events of something that's very intrinsically connected underground. Thank you for that question. All right, here. I think unless anybody has anything else here, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. Perfect. One more. All right. Corbin asks, how do correlation maps coincide with the correlation tables? Could you convert between the two? Yes. So each, I can actually go back here, just to explain this a little bit better. So each one of these lines, like churn to spatter, would, like, for example, would be, okay, on that correlation map, that would be time since churn with time since spatter in that correlation chart. So let me actually see if I can go back to one here. And again, unfortunately, it's not the perfect analogy, but so we would have, so for time since fountain, time since jet, we would have a green line from fountain going to jet because that's a very positive correlation, if that makes sense here. Let me just make everybody dizzy by going to the end of the presentation again. All right, I'm back. Thank you for the question. That's a good one. So yeah, so we're looking at correlation maps and correlation tables. It's the same thing, but one provides a little bit more context to what we're looking at, and I think the map, or the map on the physical map, looks really nice because the tables, you can kind of get lost in the numbers, and like, for example, you can miss, like, oh, Tilt's baby is like a mile away. Not actually, but stuff like that. Okay. I think we're winding down here, unless anybody has anything else.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you, Craig, for presenting here for us. Next week, we will have another presentation. Same time, same place. It will be Terracross presenting about the fountain stall mode intervals and the history of that and what to look for when it is doing that. So we will be back here next week on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. We will see you all then.